Your future self keeps showing me that there's a version of you lying in bed, exhausted, going over the thoughts that you never say out loud, wondering if things are ever really going to change, wondering if the love that you want is actually coming, if the money stress is ever going to get better, if life is always going to feel this heavy. And honestly, this part feels strange to even say out loud because most people think their lives change during the big moments, the huge breakthroughs, big important conversations, the opportunities. But your future self keeps showing me something a little bit different. Sometimes the moments that change you the most happen right before you fall asleep. Because the second that your mind starts drifting, the grip starts loosening. The overthinking gets quieter, the emotional noise stops fighting so hard for your attention. And for just a little while, you become more open than you might realize. But your subconscious mind, it stays awake. It's listening, absorbing, building. And your future self says most people unknowingly fall asleep rehearsing fear. They're replaying arguments, replaying failures, replaying loneliness and scarcity, whispering stress into the deepest part of themselves every night without even knowing it. And then they wonder why life keeps reflecting the same emotional reality back at them. But tonight, your future self wants to change that pattern. Because later in this reading, your future self is going to explain why the words you repeat right before sleep become emotional instructions to your nervous system. It's your identity, and eventually it will become your reality. And honestly, once you understand this, you'll never fall asleep the same way again. Your future self keeps showing me that nighttime has become emotionally heavy for a lot of you listening. The distractions disappear, the silence gets louder, and suddenly every unresolved feeling rises to the surface. That's why so many people fall asleep anxiously, not because they're weak, but because nighttime removes escape. And your future self says this is exactly why your final thoughts before sleep matter so much. Because those last few minutes before you fall asleep are one of the only times that your subconscious mind becomes deeply impressionable, almost open and receptive. In whatever emotional state you drift into sleep carrying, your nervous system practices all night long. So, if it's fear, lack, loneliness, hope, peace, worthiness, it doesn't matter, but that's what you're carrying into the rest of the night. And your future self says the subconscious doesn't argue, it just absorbs. So it's really just believing whatever you're telling it. That's why some people unknowingly train themselves into emotional suffering through repetition. And they're not doing it intentionally, it's just a habit. And I think some of you are realizing now how often you fall asleep emotionally bracing for disappointment, bracing for bills, bracing for rejection, bracing for abandonment, bracing for things to just fall apart. And your body became so used to survival mode that peace started to feel unfamiliar. But tonight, your future self wants to interrupt that cycle, not with some fake positivity, not with forced affirmations that you don't even believe, but something deeper. Because your future self says the words repeated before sleep should not feel like a performance. They shouldn't feel like an act in a play. They should feel like emotional permission, permission to trust, permission to stop carrying the entire world alone for the night, permission just to soften and rest. And the first thing your future self wants you to say before sleep is this: I am deeply loved, and that love flows effortlessly into my life. I'll say it again. I am deeply loved, and that love flows effortlessly into my life. So take a breath just for a second, because some of you have spent so long trying to earn love that effortless love almost feels impossible. You learned to overgive, to overprove, overextend, overanalyze, and somewhere along the way, love became associated with exhaustion. Your future self says real love does not constantly make your nervous system suffer. Real love feels safe enough for your spirit to rest. And the reason this sentence matters before sleep is because your subconscious has been carrying emotional evidence against it for years. Evidence from heartbreaks, from disappointments, from inconsistencies, from feeling overlooked, forgotten, or unchosen. But your future self says healing begins the moment you stop speaking to yourself like abandonment is inevitable. That changes your energy more than you realize, because people who feel deeply unloved often unconsciously expect rejection everywhere. And expectation shapes our perception. That's why your future self says this sentence before sleep is not just about attracting love, it's about teaching your nervous system that love is safe to receive. And honestly, some of you are going to cry the first few nights you try saying this, because your body realizes how long it has been emotionally starving. But your future self wants to talk about the second sentence now, because the next one directly affects the fear so many of you quietly carry. And that's about money. But it's not just about money itself, it's the emotional weight attached to it, the stress, the pressure, the fear of not having enough, the exhaustion of constantly thinking about how to survive. Your future self says a lot of people don't actually have a money problem, they have a safety problem. They don't feel safe relaxing, safe receiving, or safe trusting. And when someone's nervous system is constantly preparing for disaster, they often block themselves from receiving naturally. Not because abundance hates them, but because fear contracts everything. That's why the second thing your future self wants you to whisper before sleep is: money flows to me in unexpected and abundant ways. Money flows to me in unexpected and abundant ways. It's not I chase money, not I struggle for every dollar, not life is so hard, but it flows to me. Because your future self says wealth enters differently when someone stops treating survival as their permanent identity. And I know some of you immediately resist that sentence. Part of you says, you don't understand my bills. My stress is real. My situation is very hard. Your future self says, yes, your reality does matter. But this is not about denying reality. It's about changing the relationship to possibility. Because some of you became so emotionally attached to struggle that receiving started to feel dangerous. Like, if things got too good, something bad would happen. That's survival conditioning. And your future self says the subconscious mind keeps reproducing what feels familiar, even when familiar hurts. That's why this sentence matters before sleep, because you're teaching your subconscious that abundance no longer needs to feel threatening, that receiving no longer requires guilt, that wealth no longer has to arrive through burnout. Future self says the version of you capable of real wealth is much calmer than you might imagine. They're not frantic, they're not desperate, they're grounded because abundance expands most easily inside a nervous system that finally feels safe enough to receive it. And there's one more sentence that your future self wants you to carry into sleep tonight. This one might be the most important because your future self keeps showing me how tired you are of trying to figure everything out alone, trying to predict every outcome, control every detail, prepare for every possible disappointment. Honestly, that level of hypervigilance becomes exhausting after a while. Some of you haven't fully rested in years, at least not deeply, anyways. Because even while sleeping, your mind keeps searching for answers. It's searching for signs, searching for proof that things are finally going to work out, searching for certainty. And your future self says that constant searching is quietly draining your spirit. That's why the final thing that your future self wants you to say before sleep is this: every answer I need is already on its way to me. Every answer I need is already on its way to me. Feel the softness in that sentence. It's not force, it's trust. Because your future self says some answers arrive through logic, but others arrive through timing, intuition, clarity, through suddenly seeing what your fear could not see before. And honestly, a lot of the answers you're chasing right now cannot arrive while you're emotionally gripping life so tightly. That's why surrender matters, but not like passive surrender. It needs to be peaceful, the kind that says, I do not need to carry the entire future tonight. And your future self says this is where real transformation begins. Not during the loud moments, but during the quiet ones, the moments where you choose to stop feeding fear before sleep. Because the subconscious mind is always listening, it's always adapting, it's always building identity through repetition. And your future self says most people accidentally rehearse suffering every night before bed. You're learning how to rehearse peace instead. And that's going to change a lot for you. The way you wake up changes, the way you speak changes, the opportunities you notice change, the relationships you tolerate will change, the energy you carry changes. And eventually, your entire reality becomes reflecting the inner shift. Because identity always shapes perception, and perception shapes behavior, and behaviors shape our lives. That's why your future self says these sentences are not spells, they're emotional instructions. Instructions teaching your nervous system that love is now safe, that abundance is now safe, that trust is now safe. And I think some of you have been emotionally exhausted for so long that you forgot life was supposed to feel a lot lighter than it is. And that's not weakness. That allows healing to happen. And your future self keeps showing me the version of you that you're becoming sleeps differently too, breathes differently, thinks differently, and trusts differently. Not because everything just became perfectly overnight, but because your relationship with yourself changed first. And that's the real shift, because people often think manifestation begins with the getting, what you can manifest to yourself. But your future self says it actually begins with becoming. Becoming someone whose subconscious no longer rehearses fear every single night before bed. And maybe that's why this message found you tonight. Not to convince you to control the universe, to manifest more things, but to remind you that your inner world is listening to you constantly, especially in the quiet moments, especially right before sleep. And tonight, your future self simply wants you to rest differently, to stop carrying fear into tomorrow before tomorrow even arrives, to stop whispering hopelessness into your spirit every night, and instead to fall asleep remembering something your soul has needed to hear for a very long time. You are loved. You are supported. You are allowed to receive. And life is still unfolding for you even while you rest. Until next time, stay magnetic, friends.